Chapter 181. Rasputin Bides His Time. Wednesday, May 22, 1996, somewhere across Horcruxes left. 3. Ring, Snake, Cup. Grigory Rasputin watched the news. He had been absolutely astonished when he had seen the technological progress humanity had made in just 80 years. Men walking on the moon. Devices which did rapid computation. Boxes which allowed people to witness broadcasts all over the world. Aircraft which could cross the Atlantic in one jump. It was amazing. His first thought upon seeing a television set was that some of the wizards had worked around the statute of secrecy and used magic to create these devices. However, he had examined a television set critically through magic and saw for himself that there was no magic involved, only technology. It had occurred to him that humanity now had access to technology which could perform feats powerful enough to transform the world. Furthermore, the Muggles were still, for the most part, unfamiliar with magic. This put him in a rather interesting position. If he were able to use magic to control these futuristic humans' minds and use their technology to support his goals, how far would he be able to go? For all he knew, he'd be able to control the world and wipe out the remaining Romanovs without having to resort to a death curse. Rasputin looked around the room. It was definitely doable. He had a good-sized organization around him, one which included many wizards. All of these wizards were present-day humans, so they were familiar with modern technology. If he managed to extract unbreakable oaths from them that they agree to help him and not take over the world themselves, things could get interesting. There was only one minor problem, unfortunately. Some idiot in North Korea might have just stolen his idea, or at least alerted the Muggles that a wizard dictatorship was possible. The man in charge of North Korea had died, and his replacement had come out as a wizard shortly after he was sworn in. The new leader, a former general, seemed to be very charismatic and had hidden his magical abilities until he had taken control. Rasputin didn't doubt for a moment that Chang Sung-tik had world domination on his mind. The Korean's experience as a general probably meant that he was a shrewd diplomat and military tactician. Add to that the fact that he was a wizard and that he already had supreme control of the country. Rasputin shuddered. Chang Sung-tik couldn't pass up this opportunity for world power, and if the man was as smart as Rasputin thought he was, he wouldn't. The big question was, what should Rasputin do about it? He operated under the assumption that the Korean would make a bid for world power and that the Muggles would probably try to stop him. There would likely be a short but fierce war which would damage both sides greatly and leave North Korea a smoldering ruin. Who would win such a war? It was unclear. A wizard could kill a lot of Muggles in ways they couldn't even conceive of, and in some cases have no way to even defend against. However, the Muggles supposedly had weapons which could destroy entire cities in an instant. What would the Korean do if Pyongyang were attacked with one of these devices? He doubted that even the strongest wizard would be able to survive an attack by a weapon that powerful. Rasputin himself wouldn't have been able to. Had he been the North Korean wizard, he would have created a Horcrux to ensure that he would stay around until his takeover was complete. There were 3 problems with that scenario, though. First, was the North Korean a dark enough wizard to even consider creating a Horcrux? Come to think of it, did Chang Sung-tik even know how to create a Horcrux? Rasputin doubted it. Second, Rasputin suspected that the Muggles would be able to destroy a Horcrux by dropping one of those tremendous bombs on it. Finally, even if the Korean had a Horcrux, what was preventing the enemy from effectively nullifying it by removing one of the components necessary for the ritual to revive someone from a Horcrux? Rasputin still couldn't believe how the Romanovs had knocked out his Horcrux by vaporizing his father's body. That gave him 2 more reasons to avenge himself on them. 1, for removing his Horcrux, and 2, for desecrating his father's tomb. Should he join forces with the Korean? He nixed that immediately. There was no way that either man would be willing to share power. He and Chang Sung-tik would eventually be at each other's throats, and the resulting civil war would leave the Muggles in a perfect position to obliterate both sides. He thought about it for a while and eventually made a decision. There was no way he would be able to start on his plans for world domination as long as this Korean was still around. He could have his men try to kill the Korean, but that could have dangerous international implications, as the man was the recognized ruler of a sovereign state. This meant that he would have to lie low and wait until the Korean had been dealt before he could stake his own claim as dictator. The more he thought about it, the more this made sense. Both the Muggles and the North Koreans would have been weakened greatly by the conflict between Chang Sungteek and the Muggle world. This would leave Rasputin in the perfect position to take the world by surprise and attack both sides once they had softened each other up. Hell, he might be able to have his men polyjuice into Koreans and restart the fight between the Koreans and the Muggles by claiming to be Chang Sungteek's heirs or something like that. That would just injure both sides further before he came in to sweep them away. He made his decision. He'd wait until the end of the year and reassess the situation at that time. If everything went as planned, he'd start his takeover attempt 9 months after the fall of Chang Sungteek. He immediately set to work, planning how to do that. Chapter 182. The Arrival of Petrus Romanus. Wednesday, May 22, 1996, Britain for Humans Headquarters, York, England. Horcruxes left. 3. Ring, Snake, Cup. Isabel Miller nearly jumped for joy when she heard the news come across the TV screen. Something had actually gone right for a change. Several anonymous sources were reporting that the wizard who had supposedly been the ghost of the prophet Samuel had vanished along with his sidekick, a woman who either went by Angia or Deborah. Supposedly Samuel had finally gotten fed up with trying to reform the world, conceded defeat, and disappeared. That was one fewer wizard she would have to deal with. What had been even more impressive had been Celestine Vi's reaction. John Paul Roman II had informed Celestine that Samuel had left and that there was no longer any reason for Celestine to dispute the papacy. Would the anti-pope be willing to step down for the sake of unity? The pope reminded Celestine that Celestine had promised would renounce his claim if John Paul stopped listening to Samuel. Samuel was now gone. Would Celestine keep his word? Amazingly, Celestine Roman VI had indeed stepped down. Isabel didn't know whether that was good or bad. It was good in that it showed that Celestine had indeed been an honorable, pious man, fitting of a tenure as the antipope. It was also good in that it had stopped the schism. On the other hand, it left the wizard as the pope, which was going to be a problem. The Catholic Church was unified again, for approximately 6 hours. That was when a Byzantine Catholic clergyman from Sofia, a Roma man named Petr Jeferovich, took Celestine's place as Pope Urban Roman VIII. Reputedly, Celestine had tried to talk him out of it, going so far that he could conceivably be seen as Petrus Romanus, the Pope of the Apocalypse, but it didn't work. Urban said that he was putting a claim in for the papacy not because John Paul followed Samuel, but because John Paul was a wizard. Urban said that the Bible said to not trust wizards, and who were people to dismiss the word of God. He explained that the reason the world had been having so many problems of late was because John Paul had started practicing openly as a wizard. God didn't like that, and was warning the world that someone had to get rid of him. The new antipope quickly became Isabel's spiritual leader. She wouldn't become Catholic, but she would definitely follow Urban's lead on things. The Celestines, the new denomination, still went by the name of the Celestine Church, much to the former antipope's chagrin, supported him wholeheartedly. That was not a surprise, however. Celestine Roman VI had been in the minority, as he had broken from Rome because they hadn't liked the direction Samuel had been taking the church in. The vast majority of the Celestines had joined the new sect because they were either against wizards, more conservative than John Paul, or supportive of icons. Urban enthusiastically supported all three of these positions. The only question now was, who was the more dangerous wizard, John Paul Roman II or Chang Sungteek, The fact that a wizard had popped up in charge of a foreign country, and a bit of a rogue state to boot, filled her with dread. What would the Korean do? She had disturbing visions of flying tanks and witches blasting the South and drawing the world into global thermonuclear war. Someone had to get rid of that wizard, and do so in a hurry. But who was going to do that? Britain for Humans wasn't nearly powerful enough to do the job, and she doubted most of the members even spoke Korean. Going after various people in a church and supporting anti-wizard legislation was one thing. Assassinating foreign heads of state was something entirely different. She chuckled. If she were lucky, perhaps John Paul and Chang Sung-teek would destroy each other and leave the world safe with Urban Roman VIII as the sole pope. Maybe Tom Riddle could get involved as well, and all three of them could destroy each other. Riddle, or Voldemort, as he was supposedly called, certainly seemed the type of person who'd want to take over the world. It was obvious that he'd done some serious planning in his attempt to take over Britain, and would have very likely succeeded had it not been for that Greek chap and Rufus Scrimgeour. She looked at her watch and saw there was a little more time before she had to go to the rendezvous point to meet with the new Britain for Humans members. Membership had gone up drastically over the past few days as members of America for Humans had fled the country and flew over to Britain via Canada to join up with Britain for Humans and seek asylum in England. Shrugging, she turned on the television set. The TV was airing a live broadcast from Chang Sung-teek in North Korea. The man was reporting that he wanted all of the wizards to come out of hiding and help him make North Korea prosper. They would be interviewed and have their skills assessed. The best of the best would be recruited by Moon Jae-jae, the nation's new Secretary of Magic. The others would be issued jobs repairing roads, making trains run on time, improving the productivity of farms, and so forth. Chang Sung-teek then issued a call which troubled Isabel. She paid more attention to the speech at that point and tried to ignore the fact that the speaker's lips didn't match the sounds being voiced by the English translator. Ladies and gentlemen of the great Korean state, you may be interested to know that there may be witches and wizards among you who have lived out their entire lives as Muggles, that is, people who do not believe they can cast spells. This is because, although for the most part wizarding ability is hereditary, occasionally wizards come along with Muggles as one or both parents. It is the duty of this state to make sure that these individuals are not overlooked and are given the training they need to be wizards just like me and the rest of the Ministry of Magic. As of today, I am starting a program which will be focusing on the recruitment of Muggle-born wizards. If you are a Muggle-born wizard, or you are a Muggle who believe your child may have magical abilities, don't hesitate to register for this program. As an extra incentive, Muggles who have their children register will be given a substantial, reward if the children are indeed proven to be wizarding material. Isabel, indeed. The whole world had no idea that Voldemort was just going to kill the Muggle-born wizards and use the monetary reward as an excuse to shut the Muggles up, lest the reward be revoked and they fall back into the peasantry. Isabel grunted. This guy was going to be a problem. He was going to create an army of wizards at the rate things were going. He had to be stopped. Recruiting New Britain for Humans members couldn't hurt at a time like this. She looked at her watch one last time. It was time to go. Gathering up some brochures, she picked up her car keys and left the house, locking the door behind her. Chapter 183. The Philosopher's Stone Compromised. Thursday, May 23, 1996. Flamel residents of Devon, England. Horcruxes left. 3. Ring, snake, cup. Nicholas Flamel couldn't help but laugh. They've only figured out recently that my family, so to speak, has been teaching there forever. His wife nodded. That's what it looks like, Nicholas. In all fairness, though, it was overdue. You've been a godsend to that school and have put its medieval literature department on the map. However, I never expected them to have a major dinner in appreciation of the contribution of you and your ancestors. Flamel looked at the invitation again. I see Hugh is invited as well. I freely admit, my love, that I wouldn't be here were it not for him. He helped me learn English back in the 1370s and piqued my interest in English literature. I doubt that the Englishmen would have been as welcoming to me if I had spent most of the time speaking to them in French. Hell, back in the old days, they'd have probably killed me on the spot. Is he coming as well? He's getting the car, Nicholas. I figured we'd dispense with the brooms, as there could be lots of people in that crowd who don't realize we're wizards. Flamel nodded and reached for his hat. Well, I guess we should head off. We shouldn't keep them waiting. After all, we're the guests of honor. It's a pity John and Robert couldn't come. Both Flamels laughed out loud as Nicholas set the burglar alarm and closed the door on the empty house. The corporate spy, in the pay of Harold Green Pharmaceutical Corporation, hid in the hedges, his binoculars trained on the house. He spoke quietly and urgently into the walkie-talkie. They're leaving the house now. It looks like they bought it, Mr. Green. I never thought you'd be able to convince the university to hold a dinner for them. Green chuckled. All I had to have the wizard do was show the English department the old staff directories with all those Flamels in there. They took it from there. Clever. All right, their car is pulling up in front of their house. I suspect, yes, Hugh is driving it. It looks like all three of them are going, which makes things easier for us. Dr. Flamel and his wife are getting into the car right now, and there they go down the street. There was a pause of about 15 seconds, followed by, "The car has gone around the corner, and no one is in sight. It's party time." Green whistled, and the so-called investigation committee drove up in front of the house. 5 people got out of the unmarked car, including a wizard. Green shook everyone's hands. "Gentlemen, listen, and listen well. We've only got an hour or so to do this, and we have to be out of here before the Flamels get back. It's going to be risky, but if we are successful, we're going to be filthy rich. Our top priority is to get our hands on Dr. Flamel's lab book and photocopy enough of the information to make it possible for Hendrickson here to duplicate the Philosopher's Stone. He's got to have it in the house, somewhere. He wouldn't let it out of his sight. This book will likely be one of the oldest works in the house, and it's probably going to be hidden. If you don't find the book, keep an eye out for the stone itself and take it instead. Of course, Flamel isn't going to take the theft of the stone philosophically. He's going to want it back. How old is he, at least biologically? 75 or so. When he asks about it, we'll tell him that we've got it, and we'll give it back just as soon as he agrees to show us how to make more of them. You can ransack everything you want. Open drawers, turn out dressers, and so forth. Hendrickson here has a spell which will clean up after us and make sure that everything winds up in the same place where it started. No one will know that we were ever there." Green looked around at his fellow accomplices. "Any questions? No, then let's go." The raiding party headed over to the front door. Hendrickson tried the handle, but of course it was locked. He shrugged and pointed his wand at the handle. "Alohimora." There was a click as the lock disengaged. Green led everyone into the house just as the burglar alarm began buzzing, warning the intruder to deactivate it within 60 seconds or it would summon the police. Green whistled at Hendrickson. "Look around and see if there's a control panel for the alarm. If so, hex it so it shuts up and thinks we've entered the code." Hendrickson nodded and began running through the house. The alarm shut off maybe 20 seconds later. "Everyone take a room and see if you can find anything. If looks old, be extra careful, both because it may be fragile and because it may be what we want. If it's in a foreign language, summon Hendrickson. He'll be able to check if it's magical or pertains to magic. If it's encrypted at all, do the same thing. Perhaps our pet wizard will be able to decode it. We don't know what the stone looks like, so I want you guys to check out anything that looks remotely suspicious which you don't recognize. I don't care if it's a paperweight or a glorified snooker ball. Call him over and he will check if it's a magical item. If it's magical, then we'll discuss it. If not, put it back. Green issued one last warning. Do not touch anything with your hands. Use the gloves. We don't want to leave fingerprints, and we don't want anything activated by human touch to start sounding alarms. Be careful and good luck. The raiders spread throughout the house. Green himself focused on the living room. He opened all the cabinets and tossed out all of their contents, looking frantically for books and anything which looked remotely suspicious. He stumbled across a box of what appeared to be bottles. He unstoppered one of the bottles and bent over to look inside. This proved to be a big mistake, as hideous fumes suddenly started wafting out of the opening. He dropped the bottle in shock and was barely able to restrain himself from retching all over the floor. The bottle shattered on the floor and sprayed objects, which looked like insect eyes, all over the rug. Near the back of the cabinet, he saw something odd. It appeared to be a small object the size of a paperweight. It appeared to be glowing brightly. Trembling with excitement, he screamed, "Hendrickson, I think I've found something. Get over here." Henderson raced into the room, nearly tripping over junk Green had thrown on the floor. "What have you got, Green?" All Green did was point into the cabinet. Hendrickson frowned and pointed his wand at it. He cast a few spells, and the object glowed different colors. Eventually, though, the wizard grunted and shook his head. He turned to Green. "That's a glowstone. It's a magical light which never goes out. It can be used to light a room when there's a power failure or something like that, and it's safer than a candle. That's not it. Keep looking." The wizard ran off as Green returned to the cabinet to continue his search. He was interrupted, however, by a horrible scream from upstairs. Worried that the wizards may have left magical defenses around the stone, he ran upstairs into Flamel's office. The man who had been searching Flamel's office was pointing at a huge tome. "I've found his diary. The earliest entries date back to 1345. This guy's at least 650 years old." Green glanced at the text and frowned. "Isn't this modern English?" The man shrugged. "Yes, I think he's decided to translate it for posterity. He may have a perspective on history that no one else does." Green grinned, brought out his camera and took some shots. "Hold on a second. This could be useful evidence to have. Now we can blackmail him and threaten to announce his age to the world. All right, so what happened? Why did you scream?" In response, the man turned over the diary and leafed through the most recent entries. Finally, he stabbed his finger accusingly at one of the entries. Green bent closer so he could read it. His jaw dropped after 3 words. June 5, 1992. Destroyed the stone today. It was a difficult decision, one which both Perenil and I knew would end our lives within 20 years, but I believe it was the right one. Dumbledore convinced me that we could not risk the possibility of the stone falling into Voldemort's hands. During the time I have left, I will translate my diary from French into English, while leaving out anything which helps the reader either create their own stone or identify the stone as anything other than a run-of-the-mill magical item. Hopefully, this translation will help clarify some of the mysteries which confounded the Muggles over the past 6.5 centuries. Green swore, and the man looked at him. Dr. Flamel was telling the truth the whole time when he said he didn't have it. What are? The voice was cut off by another scream, this time from downstairs. This one seemed much more terrifying, and it went on and on and on. The 2 men in the office could barely make out someone shouting, "Hendrickson," over the howling. Everyone hustled downstairs and headed towards the source of the sound. Green turned the corner and saw a most remarkable sight. 2 of the Herald Green employees were fighting with an old book, a very old book. An ominous face on the cover was screaming at the top of its virtual lungs. Seconds later, Hendrickson appeared. The wizard pointed his wand at the book, shouted finite incantatum, and the book fell silent. Green and the men who had been struggling turned to Hendrickson and shouted almost simultaneously. What the hell was that? Hendrickson looked at the book intently. That's an alarm spell. People use it to protect objects from unauthorized use. My guess is that this book is supposed to be kept secret. Had Flamel been in the house, he'd have been onto us immediately. What's in it? The man opened the book. I can't tell, Wizard Hendrickson. It appears to be in Middle French, which I'm not good at. The only thing I can see is that it's got lots of pictures in it, especially at the beginning. Hold on, this appears to be a date of some sort. Let me see. I think this say April 8, 1397. Bloody hell, is this a diary? Is this man 600 years old? Green stared at the man who had searched Flamel's office. They knew immediately what they had found. Green shoved everyone out of the way and started taking photographs of the pages. That's it. Hurry. We don't have time to lose. Hendrickson stared at him. What the? Green kept on snapping photographs. This diary has an incomplete English translation upstairs. It says that the English version is like the original one, which is in French, except that the English one has no references to the workings of the stone. This is the French diary, Hendrickson. This is the original. Judging by that alarm, it's not meant to be seen by other people. I think I know what that means. It means that the instructions for making the stone are going to be in the section written before 1420 or so. 1420? How so? Green risked a few seconds to glare at the man, because he'd be dead otherwise of natural causes. The earliest date in the English version is 1345. He must have made the stone before he hit 100, assuming he started the diary at 20 or so. Hendrickson raced towards the book. We don't have time for that, Green. Get out of the way. Shoving people aside, he pointed his wand at the book and shouted, Geminio. There was a flash of light, and a second, identical book appeared on the floor. Hendrickson scooped up the duplicate and put it in his briefcase. Now let's clean up and get out of here before anyone investigates that noise. About 15 minutes later, Hugh and the Flamels returned home to find several people gathered in front of their house. Nicholas Flamel didn't like the look of this. Were they Britain for humans people who wanted to pick a fight with him? Hugh put his hand on Nicholas's shoulder. Hold on a second, master. Let me handle this. Wand at the ready, he got out of the car and addressed the people. Good evening. What are you chaps all doing in front of our house? One of the people spoke up. There was a brief scream in the house about 20 minutes ago. By the time we came over and knocked on the door, the scream had vanished and the door was locked. Nicholas got out. There was a scream in the house. None of us were there. The Muggle shrugged. I heard a scream, all right. I don't know what it was, and to be honest, I don't want to know. At least you guys are all right. Nicholas turned to his wife and Hugh. Wands out. I have no idea what's going on in there, but I think we'd better be careful. He opened the door as the other two spellcasters brought out their wands. Flamel was greeted ominously by the sound of silence. The burglar alarm not had activated. Flamel distinctly remembered arming it before he left. Increasingly troubled, he went over to the control panel and noticed that all the lights had burned out. There was only one thing that could produce such an effect: magic. Flamel swore, Heads up, there may be a burglar in the house, one who is a wizard. Let's find him. Revelio Harmonum. The spell reported the house was empty. Flamel frowned and continued his investigation. He didn't remember the rooms being this clean. Several of the countertops had been filled with dishes that needed to be put back in the cabinets. Someone or something had put them away. Hugh whistled. I think someone tried to clean up the after break-in and overdid it. The spell was too powerful and put everything away, even though the house hadn't started out completely orderly. I must say, Master, that whoever it was didn't find what they were looking for. Everything is still here. Perennial scratched her head. This doesn't make sense, Nicholas. What would a wizard want to steal from us? I don't. All three of them suddenly answered simultaneously. The stone. Voldemort did it. Nicholas marshaled his troops. Hugh, you go upstairs and check my office. Perennial, check the bedroom. I'll make sure that the original diary is still around. The diary is key, you two. With the stone gone, Whoever went after it won't be able to get much out of it without creating it from scratch, and the original diary is the only thing which has the instructions. Mrs. Flamel went upstairs with Hugh as Nicholas hurried to the cabinet. Bracing himself for the howling, he pulled out the diary and opened it. There was no howl. Nicholas Flamel literally staggered when he realized what that meant. A wizard had entered the house and had done something to the diary to remove the alarm spell. The wizard had seen the diary and must have opened it, otherwise he wouldn't have set off the alarm and known to disrupt the spell. He would likely be able to understand all of the diary's contents if the wizard knew of the duplication charm and cast it on the book. Horrified, he called back his wife and apprentice. The two of them stared at him in shock and immediately asked him what was wrong. In response, he opened the book and pointed at its contents. Our worst nightmare has come to pass. The secret is out. Within a matter of months, people will be able to create their own philosopher's stones. God help us all if Voldemort finds out about this. Chapter 184, Double Agent. Friday, May 24, 1996, Slytherin Common Room Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizard England Horcruxes left. 3. Ring, Snake, Cup. Draco Malfoy couldn't do it. He owed everything to Snape. He even admitted to himself that he admired Snape more than his father in some cases. His father tended to be too harsh from time to time. Snape could be brutal as well, but he seemed always to have had a soft spot for Draco that went far beyond his allegiance to Slytherin. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that he didn't have the guts to kill anyone. Crabbe and Goyle might, considering their increased self-confidence and machismo simply because they were big. Draco, on the other hand, had his mind as his strong suit. He wondered if he should ask one of his two bodyguards to kill Snape. That would probably do the job. However, Voldemort probably wouldn't like that, as the assassination of Snape was supposed to be Draco's test, not theirs. Both boys would probably start boasting that they'd killed Snape. Voldemort would find out and punish Draco severely for failing the test and deceiving him, possibly killing him. He could only envision this going one of two ways. His first option was to defect to Dumbledore's side to run from an angry Voldemort. He dismissed that immediately, and there was no honor in that. His second was to do Dumbledore what Snape had done to Voldemort, be a double agent for the enemy. He would send word to Voldemort that he had decided upon something which would further the Dark Lord's goals even further than killing Snape, appearing to defect to Dumbledore while still relaying information to Voldemort. If everything went as he had hoped, the Dark Lord would accept the double agent role in lieu of Snape's murder and still promote him to full Death Eater. Draco's new position would likely neutralize Snape almost as much as if he had killed his housemaster, as Voldemort would know about all of Snape's moves and counter them before they became an issue. The big question was what to do about Crabbe and Goyle. Draco would have to appear to have defected in order for this charade to work. This would mean that Crabbe and Goyle would have to beat him up, or at least stop being friends with him. The only way he would be able to maintain Crabbe and Goyle as his bodyguards would be for him to explain that they had to be in on the act, and would have to become double agents as well. The problem with this, however, was that Crabbe and Goyle tended to talk before they thought, and would likely blurt out that all three of them were double agents. Draco smiled as a solution presented itself. He would request that Crabbe and Goyle get their own individual assignments to further their transitions to full Death Eaters. Both boys were underage, of course. However, they needed to learn that as Death Eaters, they might not be able to rely on their friends to support. Draco, Crabbe, and Goyle would eventually have to separate to do the will of the Dark Lord, so they had to start practicing with individual missions. That would make it look like Crabbe and Goyle had defriended Draco. The three boys could get together once again outside of school, as neither Snape nor Dumbledore would be able to witness that. Relieved that he had reached a decision, he sent word to Voldemort and told him that he was planning to become a double agent. Bracing himself, He headed for Dumbledore's office to ask him for asylum. One of the advantages of McGonagall becoming headmistress was that he didn't need a password to go to Dumbledore's office anymore. The venerable wizard was looking at a parchment containing a picture of a ring decorated with an odd symbol consisting of a triangle, a circle, and a line. Dumbledore stared at him curiously as he rolled up the parchment. "Good afternoon, Draco. How are you doing? You're lucky you caught me as I was about to leave on an important and dangerous journey." Draco drew a deep breath and stared the old man. "Professor, I need some help. I've just been given a most disturbing assignment, one which I don't think I'll be able to fulfill." Dumbledore frowned. "Really? Which professor is this?" "Voldemort, sir." Dumbledore's eyes widened. "Indeed. What does he want you to do?" "I have been ordered to kill Professor Snape. He is aware that Snape is a defector and wants me to get rid of him. I can't do it, Professor. He has helped me too much, and I won't do it." Dumbledore puts a hand on Draco's shoulder. "That is a wise move, Draco, one worthy of a Hogwarts student. I take it that you want to join our side because you wish to protection from Voldemort." "Yes, Professor. I'd have to lose Crabbe and Goyle as friends and try to stop saying words like mudblood. But I think I'll be able to manage it. I'm 15 now, and it's about time I grew up. Don't tell my father, however, or he'll kill me or inform Voldemort." To Draco's astonishment and great discomfort, Dumbledore gave him a hug. "Thank you, Draco. Your help will be most appreciated. Come with me to the headmistress so we can tell her." They headed up to the headmistress's tower, where McGonagall seemed to be busy in conversation with two other people. One of them was Rufus Scrimgeour, the Minister of Magic. The other was a bearded man whom Draco did not recognize, and whose eyes seemed to be far wiser than any he'd ever seen before, by a long shot. Draco knew that age granted wisdom, but this man seemed to be much wiser than he looked. The minister was talking to the bearded man. "I assure you, Dr. Flamel, will keep an eye out for it. We don't want Voldemort to get his hands on the book, as it would be an absolute disaster. I take it the original has been destroyed." The bearded man nodded and glanced at Draco. "Yes, Minister, both the original book and the object have been incinerated. I'd recommend tabooing the object's name so that you know where the thief went." The minister nodded, thanked the stranger, and turned to Dumbledore. "We'll be with you shortly, Dumbledore. I've got to discuss something with McGonagall first." Dumbledore nodded and stepped back as the minister turned to McGonagall. "All right, we're done with Flamel now. Now, Minerva, it's your turn. We've rounded up all the werewolves but one, Harrison Cooper. Full Moon is a week away, and we don't know where he is. This is bad, Minerva. We may need to get Interpol and Dialynis involved if he's left the country. In the meantime, we'll watch the hospitals in Britain. He's likely going to experience some symptoms of lycanthropy as the full moon comes closer, and he may make an appointment with the doctor. I'll keep you posted if anything happens." McGonagall nodded. "That would be most appreciated, Minister. I take it the other 26 are all under control. They're wearing ankle bracelets, which will transport them to the Ministry safe house just before the full moon. They will not be a threat." McGonagall turned to Dumbledore. "Good. You're doing the best you can, Minister. One werewolf is going to be less of a problem than 27, and as it is, I'm sure the last man will come up. Now, let's hear what Albus has to say." Dumbledore looked over to Draco. "Lady and gentlemen, I believe Draco Malfoy has something very important to tell you, one which will help make it much easier for us to pursue Voldemort. It appears that Voldemort has ordered Draco to kill Severus. Draco refused to do it, and has decided to seek asylum from our side." Everyone cheered and congratulated Draco. Draco pasted a smile on his face and wondered what they would have thought had they realized his true intentions. Chapter 185. The Fall of Rodolphus. Friday, May 24, 1996, after Sundar Ministry of Magisterial Horcruxes left. 3. Ring, snake, cup, Mickle Oved was taking an awful risk. She had initially refused to respond to the magical terrorist attack with a magical attack of her own, lest it escalate the already worsening relations between Hamas and Israel. The world was already disintegrating as it was, and a magical war between Hamas and Israel would just make things worse. There had been a coup in North Korea, and the new ruler just happened to let slip that he was a wizard. The South was almost certainly going insane. As if that hadn't been bad enough, the British Minister of Magic, Rufus Scrimgeour, had apparently lost track of Voldemort, Lestrange's boss. The feared Englishman had disappeared along with his faithful servant, Lucius Malfoy. Malfoy hadn't been seen in the Ministry of Magic for a couple of weeks now, which was highly unusual and almost certainly a bad sign. She didn't like the idea of sending wizards along with Mossad members to take out Rodolphus Lestrange and the rest of his thugs. However, it was increasingly obvious she had no choice. Although the attack on the base in the West Bank had succeeded, it had been a hollow victory. None of the wizards had been neutralized, and many Palestinian civilians had lost their lives. Furthermore, the wizards had managed to put a magical shield around the base, which required that one of the pilots crash his aircraft into the base to overwhelm it. The Israeli Defense Force couldn't sacrifice various multi-million-dollar aircraft each time it wanted to attack a wizard, and the country in general couldn't risk more civilian casualties on either side. This meant that they needed a surgical strike which would target the wizards and only the wizards. The surviving Hamas members would probably quiet down significantly once they realized they no longer had any wizards to protect them. She had spoken with every single agent involved in the mission and told them exactly what to do. The top priority was to kill Voldemort. Although there was no evidence that the evil mastermind was actually hiding out as a Hamas operative, there was no evidence against that hypothesis either. Besides, the fact remained that Pers had shown his hand when he had attacked the base. It was obvious that Israel was going to attack Rodolphus again, and the wizard was almost certainly going to call for help. The second priority would be to kill Rodolphus. He was Hamas's primary wizard, and the only person who likely knew Voldemort. Once those two men were out of the way, the wizards were to neutralize any remaining wizards hiding in Hamas. Finally, once Hamas had been reduced to Muggles, and only Muggles, the wizards were to back off. Having wizards attack Muggles would be opening Pandora's box for good, and let the Mossad do the job. Several of the agents had been offended that they were being forced to work on the Sabbath. She had expected such resistance, however, and told them that this was an emergency and that lives were at stake. All of the traditional customs were suspended in life-threatening emergencies. Furthermore, a Friday night operation would be unexpected, to say the least. This managed to convince them, and they agreed to go. She knew roughly where Rodolphus Lestrange was hiding out. She had put a taboo on his name and discovered that most of the speakers were clustered in a small area in Haifa. She had cursed vehemently when she was informed this. Clever bastard, she had thought. By hiding in the middle of a big city, he had effectively forced the Israelis to rule out another air attack, as any such attack would likely knock out whole blocks and kill hundreds of people. The agents the Mossad had chosen were trained for urban fighting. The people she had supplied were experienced auras, many of whom had been forced to kill dark wizards before. Voldemort and Rodolphus were to be killed on sight. The remaining wizards were to be taken prisoner. She just hoped to God that this would work. The wizard grabbed onto Eliza Bendor's arm, and the Mossad agent suddenly found himself flying through space. He panicked for a moment, and he drew in a deep breath to scream. Fortunately, the journey ended before he could let it out. He was in an empty room. There were a few guns lying against the wall along with some belts of ammunition. He may not know magic, but he knew guns. He headed over the guns and was about to take one when the wizard abruptly called him back. "Hold it, they're booby-trapped. Let me remove the spell." "It will take just a moment." The wizard brought out his wand and cast the spell. The spell accomplished two things. First, it neutralized the spells surrounding the guns so Elisa could take them. Second, it triggered a nasty disembodied howl. Elisa reached for one of the guns, and his hand passed right through it. It was an illusion, apparently. Meanwhile, the wizard swore. Caterwauling charm, the guns were bait, and we fell for it. Get that apparition interdictor up in a hurry. We can't let these guys escape. It was only a matter of time before the first enemy wizard came to investigate. Forcibly restraining himself from firing on the man, he ducked behind a desk as a green bolt flew over his head. The Death Eater raced into the room and was about to cast a spell when Minister Oved's wizard hit him with something which knocked him out cold. The wizard pointed at the door. "Cover me while I grab some of his hairs, change, and drink the polyjuice potion. All of you go ahead. I'll catch up with you." Elisa didn't need to be told twice. Making sure that his gas mask and infrared goggles were fitted firmly on his head, and urging his comrades to do the same, he withdrew a sleeping gas grenade from his backpack, pulled the pin, and tossed it into the corridor at the same time the man next to him tossed a smoke grenade. Both weapons went off simultaneously and filled the hallway with smoke. One of the other friendly wizards took advantage of the momentary confusion to race up to the front and shooting beams of light into the smoke. Elisa heard the distinctive sound of people falling to the ground just as a wildly aimed green beam nicked Cohen in the foot. The man collapsed at once and didn't move. Elisa shook his head. That wasn't fair. He gets hit in the toe and dies. The infrared glasses here were critical. Elisa suspected that the Hamas operatives hadn't had their masks on, and those who would be unable to see through the smoke. The raiding party, on the other hand, would be able to both breathe and see the enemy's heat signatures. The wizard was about to urge the men forward when there was a brief burst of light. Seconds later, Davidoff roared, "Kaplan, behind you." The wizard spun, but did so too late to save himself from the newly apparated Death Eater. The enemy wizard hit him with one of those green beams, and down went Kaplan. The man then turned his baleful gaze on the rest of the strike force. One Israeli soldier suddenly went stiff as a board, drew his pistol, and shot another friendly wizard in the forehead. Elisa blinked. What the hell? He was about to shoot the traitor when the wizard who had killed Kaplan toppled, and the Death Eater the raiding party had first encountered came up behind him. The man who had been imperieused suddenly blinked and shook his head to clear it. Elisa had to remind himself that this new Death Eater was actually friendly. It was the wizard who had drunk a potion to make him look like the Death Eater. The polyjuiced wizard raced into the smoke shouting that the invaders had been caught by surprise by the man who had just apparated in. All of the enemy wizards had been caught other than one, and that wizard had been taken prisoner. The faux Death Eater got about maybe 50 feet when someone prompted him for the password. Elisa had been afraid of this. Glancing at the wizard beside him, he had everyone move forward into the smoke to assist the wizard who was about to be unmasked. Elisa raced around the corner, weaving around various sleeping people, and saw that the polyjuiced wizard and a man in a fancy Death Eater outfit were throwing spells back and forth. One of Elisa's men pulled the pin on another sleeping gas grenade and was about to toss it when a bullet the grenadier in the head. One of the wizards shrieked a warning, and a Mossad agent picked up the grenade and heaved it into the room. The wizard fighting the polyjuiced man blasted the grenade into oblivion with his wand. Unfortunately, that left him open to the polyjuiced man, who promptly incapacitated him. Realizing that the person who had challenged him was out of the fight, the polyjuiced wizard tried the same trick once again. He didn't get very far before someone shot him in the chest, and down he went. Suddenly, there was a whoosh and a glow at the other end of the corridor, near where they had first entered the building. Elisa's eyebrows jumped as a huge wall of flame started racing towards the invaders. The enemy wizards probably couldn't see through the smoke, but they knew that Elisa's men were there somewhere. Most of the friendly wizards spun to face the flame and started casting spells to block the fire just as someone let a Kalashnikov loose on the raiding party. A good half of Eliza's party went down. He ducked at the last minute as a bullet went over his head. The man next to him grunted as a second hit him in the middle of his bulletproof vest. More would have fallen had the machine gun not suddenly leaped into the air and started floating towards Eliza. The Mossad man grabbed it and started spraying bullets all across the room, starting with the first man he could see wearing a robe. The enemy wizard went down in a heap, followed by a good half of the enemy soldiers as the rest of them suddenly ran. Eliza breathed a sigh of relief. Apparently, all of the other wizards were occupied fighting in the corridor. The remaining Hamas operatives had no wizards to protect them. The Death Eater mask had fallen off of the face of the wizard Eliza had shot when the wizard had hit the ground. A quick glance at the victim revealed that it had been Rodolphus Lestrange. Eliza nodded in satisfaction. One of the main targets had been taken care of. There was still more to do, however. He continued leading his men into the building. Half an hour later, Eliza was briefing Mikkel Oved back in the Ministry of Magic. All of the enemy wizards had been captured, except for one, an Indian fellow he didn't recognize. 25 Hamas Muggles had been killed before the rest of the cell had escaped. Voldemort had not been a member of the cell, but they had at least taken out Rodolphus Lestrange. Best of all, there had been no civilian casualties, and the wizards had obliviated the neighbors to think that all of the noise had come from a malfunctioning washing machine. The cost, however, had been grievous. All of the friendly wizards who had been sent on the mission had been obliterated other than 3, and a good 2/3 of the Mossad men were dead. Most of the survivors were badly injured. Eliza himself had taken a bullet in his arm and was wondering if he'd ever get a chance to use it again. Only time would tell if the raid had been worth it. The only thing he knew would be that Voldemort would be pissed. Chapter 186. Al-Qaeda moves to North Korea. Friday, May 24, 1996. Al-Qaeda headquarters location, classified Afghanistan. Horcruxes left. 3. Ring, snake, cup. Wizard Arif Mesa Akuri glared at the man speaking at the other end of the table. These guys didn't get it, he thought. Wizards ruled Muggles, not the other way around. When wizards spoke, Muggles listened. The era of the Muggle ruler was swiftly nearing its end. The speaker was looking around the table and speaking urgently. Gentlemen, President Clinton knows we were involved. He even sent a warning to the president of Afghanistan that either the Afghans are going to have to turn us in or the Americans will come in and do it themselves. We're going to have to move the base and do it soon. One of the other Al-Qaeda leaders shook his head. Shahir, they're not going to find us. We'll just hide in the mountains like we usually do. Furthermore, even if the Americans do come in, what do they expect to accomplish? The Soviets tried the same trick in 1980, and it didn't work out well for them. That was 1980. This is 1996. Technology has changed a lot in 16 years. A third man chimed in. So what? It didn't help the Americans find Osama, did it? And besides, do you seriously think the Americans would invade Afghanistan to take us out? Would they be willing to risk hundreds, if not thousands, of civilian casualties, terror attacks, and increased friction with the Muslim world just to get at us? Killing 10,000 people to avenge 7,000 doesn't make sense. Shahir rolled his eyes. They don't care about us. As long as they believe they're safe and they have their oil, all of us are expendable. You've all heard that the American people are screaming at Clinton for revenge. He's going to have to do something to ensure that he gets re-elected in November. They can do whatever they want, Shahir. They're going to meet the same fate as the Russians. Shahir shook his head. I still think we should move the base as a precaution. They have wizards, and that's how they found us last time. Most of our wizards were taken out in the raid, and Dilmy isn't here to guide us anymore. Kuri had finally had enough. He stood up and stared at Shahir. Dilmy may not be here anymore, Shahir. However, I am. I am a wizard, almost as capable as Dilmy was. I may not be as charismatic as he was, but I will do my best to protect us from any further incursions. Shahir grunted. That's what Dilmy said. I remember. In case you recall, his defensive schemes didn't work out very well. Yes, we beat off the invaders, but most of our wizards were killed. Kuri nodded. I am aware of that. That's why I'm going to do something different. You elected me as your leader for a reason, and I will honor your trust. We're going to make it impossible for them to figure out where our base is. Shahir chuckled. Really? This I've got to hear. What are you going to do, make us all invisible? Kuri nodded, impressed. Close, but not quite. First thing we're going to do is move the base. Shahir here is correct in that as long as the Americans know where it is, they can attack us again. One of the other leaders scratched his beard. And where exactly are we going to put it? The backup plan in Saudi Arabia isn't going to work all that well, as Allah knows what lunacy Fard is going to unleash next. Kuri chuckled. We're leaving the country, all right. However, we're not going to Saudi Arabia. We're going to be going to North Korea. Virtually every man in the room started screaming at the top of his lungs. Most of the comments involved derogatory things about non-Muslims and warned Kuri that the current leader of North Korea was a general who happened to let slip the fact that he was capable of casting spells. Kuri raised hands for silence. You don't understand, gentlemen. We can trust the leader of North Korea. I've worked for him in the past. Shahir scoffed. You've worked for Chang Sungtik. Kuri shook his head. No, I can explain, however, but I must insist that the information I am about to tell you not leave this room. Will you give your word? The men in the room all nodded. Good. I have not in fact worked for Chang Sungtik. However, I've worked for the wizard who has quaffed a magical potion to make himself look like Chang Sungtik. The real Chang Sungtik is dead, killed by Lucius Malfoy. The person the North Koreans elevated to the presidency is actually an imposter. Ever found it curious that this general just happened to be a wizard, and no one knew it even though the statute of secrecy had fallen 4 months prior to the coup? You know the odds that a random person happens to be a wizard are about 1 in 10,000. What really happened is that Chang Sungtik wasn't a wizard and was replaced by AM imposter, who is. There was a brief moment of silence as the people digested this. Finally, one asked, if the new ruler is a wizard posing as Chang Sungtik, which wizard is it? Kuri beamed with pride. Lord Voldemort, Dilmy's mentor. He became my mentor as well shortly after Dilmy recruited me back in Pakistan. That, gentlemen, is the information which must not leave this room. The most powerful wizard in the world is our ally, and he has positioned himself so that he is the undisputed ruler of North Korea. We will be more than welcome there. In fact, we will almost certainly be treated like royalty. Rest assured that Voldemort is sympathetic with our goals, and he will assist us as much as he can in our fight against both the great and lesser Satans. There was a collective gasp, and people started talking excitedly. Kuri sat down, satisfied. Dilmy had spoken about how powerful Voldemort was and how he had been an excellent teacher. It wouldn't be hard to convince them that Al-Qaeda was in good hands. One of the leaders shook his head again. Arif, what happens if the potion wears off? People will find out he's an imposter and stage a counter-coup. Kuri smiled. We've thought of that already. Voldemort killed off the former dear leader's family, so they won't be coming back for revenge. And yes, the potion will wear off after a while, but he has an ample supply and will drink it as soon as he wakes up each morning. The only problem would have been the original Chang Sungtik's wife, who could conceivably have seen Voldemort in his true form if she woke up before him. Shahir finished Kuri's thought, and that's why she accidentally died in the coup. Chang Sungtik is blaming the South, of course, but I can see why Voldemort got rid of her. Clever. Indeed, Shahir, and it gives Chang Sungtik a personal excuse to attack the South if he finds himself in need of a diversion. At any rate, back to the issue at hand. We will move our base of operations to a location Voldemort and I have agreed upon in North Korea. No one will expect us to go there after all. Once we arrive, I will cast the Fidelius charm on our base. This spell makes the location of the base literally undetectable by any observational technique, magical or mundane, unless I tell the searcher where it is personally. And I don't think I'll do that to that many people. I'll also apparate people to Afghanistan and Pakistan from time to time, so the Americans think that we're here. The assembled leaders nodded enthusiastically. One of them replied, "That's devious, Arif, and brilliant. America invades Afghanistan to try to reach us, gets the Muslim world mad at it, and doesn't get anywhere near us. We get to watch under the aegis of Voldemort as we perform attacks and watch America get itself deeper into trouble. World opinion turns against the great Satan, and the country falls from grace." Kuri nodded. "That's the basic idea, my friend. There may be more to come. I'll keep you posted. In the meantime, let's get started disassembling the base." Chapter 187, Missile Portkey. Saturday, May 25, 1996. 7 days to Full Moon Hotel. Tel Aviv Avavisrael Horcruxes left. 3. Ring, Snake, Cup. It wasn't the traditional Esh Elohim building. But it was better than nothing, and they weren't going to let the terrorists win by allowing the congregation to disappear without a trace. The ballroom that the hotel management had leased to them for the next 2 years was a little small, but it would be good enough. Services would continue, albeit with a fraction of the congregation and with laymen leading the services. The community was fortunate that one of the rabbinical students had been away visiting his friends. At the time, Hamas had attacked the building. The attack on Esh Elohim had turned Avner Plaisto's entire world upside down. Half of his friends had been killed when the wizard and gunman had opened fire both figuratively and literally on the congregation. The attack had triggered a wave of sympathy for the Esh Elohim victims and a corresponding desire for retaliation against Hamas. Not surprisingly, Pers had authorized an airstrike against Hamas's main base. The attacking aircraft were confronted by extremely strong defenses, including some magical shields. Nevertheless, they had managed to destroy the base. Unfortunately, the destruction hadn't been good enough. Several Palestinian civilians had been killed, and Hamas had immediately vowed to avenge their deaths. Avner couldn't blame them, considering what he had just gone through. Even worse, the wizards responsible for most of the chaos had managed to escape from the base as it was being destroyed. The news reporters were vilifying Pers for not sending wizards along with the aircraft. Pers had tried to explain that wizards couldn't fly quickly enough to keep up with fighter jets. Furthermore, magic and fancy technology often didn't work well together. Knowing that Pers' coalition in the Knesset was hanging on by a thread, Netanyahu had immediately called for a vote of no confidence in the prime minister. Virtually every Likud member fell into step behind Netanyahu. A good prime minister, Netanyahu argued, would not hold anything back when it came to defending the country from terrorists. They had attacked Israel with wizards, so Israel had clear justification to respond in kind. Pers had done what he could to hold off the Likud onslaught. Last night, the prime minister had authorized a second raid on a Hamas stronghold. This second raid had been more successful than the first and had managed to assassinate Rodolphus Lestrange, the chief wizard assigned to Hamas. Unfortunately, rumors were circulating that most of the Mossad agents and Israeli wizards had been killed in the raid and that there could be more Hamas cells out there. Mikkel Oved issued a statement explaining that the situation was well in hand, but of course no one believed her. There were also rumors of a group called Wizards for Palestinians, or something like that, consisting of a large group of wizards which supported the Palestinian cause. Pers had done what he could. However, the Likud spokespeople eventually won the day. A no-confidence vote was scheduled for Monday morning, and most of the commentators thought that it would pass. If that happened, Netanyahu, a known hawk, would be elected prime minister, and the country would be plunged into war. To make matters worse, a collapse of the government would provide just the lack of leadership. Hamas needed to be able to carry out more attacks if it so chose. Avner couldn't understand what everyone was fighting about. He knew several Palestinians, and they seemed quite friendly. He suspected that the vast majority of the Israelis and Palestinians would be willing to live together in peace, either as one state or two. The problem was that the minority which disagreed with them proved to be very vocal and good at preying on people's fears. His traditional analogy from the Old Testament came to mind. Jacob and Esau were still fighting with each other, even though their father loved them both. It was about time that their descendants stopped acting like jealous teenagers and began behaving like mature adults. Not many people realized that a simple investigation of Genesis would reveal that Esau had grown up to be an honorable, civilized chieftain who fully accepted Jacob's apology for stealing his birthright when both men were young and foolish. Esau eventually went on to rule a large nation, yet he dutifully returned to mourn with Jacob after Isaac died. Of course, Avner wanted revenge on Hamas for killing his loved ones. However, he knew that the revenge would just perpetuate the blood feud further and wouldn't do anything to bring back his fallen friends. He had spoken with many members of the congregation about whether Israel start a major military campaign against Hamas and the various terrorist organizations in general. About two-thirds of the members were hawks, which Avner more or less expected. After all, it was their synagogue that had been attacked. He could just hope that the rest of the country wasn't as hell-bent on war. The service was about halfway through the Torah reading when there was a tremendous explosion outside the building. The ground shook momentarily as Avner heard the sound of breaking glass. He had been sitting near the back of the room, so he was able to hurry outside before the crowd began streaming out. The man leading the service tried to keep everyone calm, but for some reason that didn't work. He hurried through the lobby to the main entrance to see what was going on. There was a brief crush of people trying to get out the front door, but he eventually reached the street. There was a large group of people staring to his left and up. He followed their gaze and saw a terrible sight. The 11-story apartment building less than a block away was on fire and had a huge, gaping hole in its side. It looked like a bomb had gone off or something like that. His heart sank as he realized what had happened. Hamas had committed another terrorist attack, this time to avenge the death of Rodolphus Lestrange. He turned to the man next to him. What happened? The man was almost incoherent, but managed to explain. Someone fired a missile and hit the building with it. Thank God it stayed up. I tried to help out, but the cops are keeping everyone away while they evacuate the building. Avner blinked. A missile? I didn't think these terrorist groups had missiles. I thought they used handmade rockets and stuff like that. You're sure it wasn't a rocket? I served in the IDF as well as you did, friend. In my case, I was in the Air Force. It sure looked like a missile, and it had a much greater yield than a simple Hamas rocket. It looks like they've gotten more sophisticated. Where did it come from? East somewhere. That's all I can tell. That probably means West Bank or Jordan. Avner frowned. Hamas can deliver a warhead that far. That's ridiculous. The man slowly shook his head. Hamas by itself probably can't. However, it can always try to find a backer such as Iran, Russia, North Korea, or Saudi Arabia, which is willing to give them missiles. Besides, God knows what those wizards are capable of doing. For all we know, they have spells which can turn simple homemade rockets into military-caliber missiles. Avner shook his head as people began muttering among themselves. This doesn't look good. Aren't our wizards going to do something? That oved woman is probably going to have to respond somehow in order to keep her job. The man pointed. I think they're doing something now. Take a look. Avner turned and saw a few small specks floating in formation in midair, a few miles to the east of the city. As he watched, another dot appeared, along the faint sounds of a helicopter motor. Avner nodded. It looks like the wizards are putting up some kind of defense, similar to the one the... He cut off his sentence abruptly as a light suddenly blazed over the eastern horizon, heading towards Tel Aviv in a hurry. It definitely looked too fast to be an ordinary Hamas rocket, Avner thought. That had to be a missile. The helicopter fired a rocket at the missile, but missed. A few seconds later, the missile reached the area where the wizards had been stationed. The weapon exploded in midair, as if it had run into an invisible wall. Pieces of wreckage and flaming debris fell to the ground. The sound reached Avner maybe 20 seconds later, and it was louder than he had thought it would be. That had been one big missile, he thought. The people in the street let out a weak cheer as the wizards reconstructed their shield and helicopter fired at something. There was an explosion off in the distance, and the helicopter moved to the east to deal with whatever had fired the missile. That was when there was a brief flash, a few hundred feet in the air behind the wizards, which had been caught looking the wrong way, and a third missile appeared out of nowhere. Avner had learned enough about the wizarding world to realize that could only mean one thing: missile used as Portkey. That would explain their unusual range, he thought bleakly. The missile slammed into the building which had been damaged in the first attack, this time a little lower down. This was too much for the building to take, and it suddenly collapsed upon itself, pancaking floor after floor. A huge dust cloud raced towards Avner, and he began racing down the street with a whole bunch of other people. He looked up pleadingly. "God, why are you torturing us like this? Have we done something wrong?" For a brief moment, he saw an odd-looking cloud in the sky, one which looked like a skull with a snake protruding from its mouth. Then the dust cloud overtook him, and he lost sight of the cloud. He took off his shirt and used it to cover his face so he could at least try to breathe. How many people had been in that building when it came down? 50, 100, more. This was like Esh Elohim all over again. There was no way the dovish Pers would survive the vote tomorrow. Netanyahu was going to win in a landslide, and the country would be going to war. Israel had fought many wars before and won them all. However, all they need to do was lose one, and they would likely be wiped off the map. Would this be the war where their luck would run out? Chapter 188, Nuclear Bluff. Saturday, May 25, 1996, 7 days to full moon Al-Qaeda/Hamas headquarters location, classified Democratic People's Republic of Korea Horcruxes left. 3. Ring, snake, Cup. Arif Kuri looked at his speech. This was the big one, he thought. Several people had argued with him about whether to give the speech, but he figured he'd give it a try. If all else failed, it would increase the odds that the United States would invade Afghanistan and lead the Great Satan on the road to ruin. The surviving members of Hamas had been skeptical at first of Kuri's idea of merging the two groups of freedom fighters into one group, which would pool their resources to carry out terrorist attacks. However, Kuri had bluntly pointed out that they were down to one wizard, and Israel was about to throw everything they had at them after they portkeyed that North Korean missile into the building in Tel Aviv. If Hamas were to survive upcoming the Israeli offensive, they had to team up with Al-Qaeda. Hamas would have to accept Al-Qaeda supervision as long as they needed protection from the Israelis. If at some point Hamas managed to recruit some more wizards, they would be free to break off and plan their own attacks again. While Hamas was under Al-Qaeda's control, Kuri would also agree to perform more attacks against Israel to support Hamas's movement. After a long discussion, the Sheikh, the man in charge of Hamas, had finally relinquished control of the terrorist organization to Kuri on an interim basis. Hamas was now in the process of packing up many of its members and sending them over to North Korea so they could join up with Al-Qaeda's members and take shelter under the wing of Voldemort. Kuri's big speech had originally been Hamas's idea. Flush with pride after their successful attempt to use a missile as a portkey, the Sheikh had gotten cocky and had posed a radical, in fact reckless, new idea. It would be a major bluff, to say the least. However, Kuri soon realized that the group was in a very strong position and could very well try a bluff. Al-Qaeda and Hamas had both threatened several attacks and delivered each time. Why would the Israelis or Americans think this threat would be any different? Furthermore, if the Americans backed off, Hamas would be given more time to recoup and complete their move to North Korea. Khoury tried to envision the Americans' response. Assuming that Al-Qaeda's security was good enough to prevent anyone from finding out that the threat was in fact non-existent, he saw no way for them not to back off. The ramifications of this prospective Al-Qaeda operation were just too significant for them to risk calling his bluff, particularly after both organizations had developed a track record for delivering on attacks which they had promised. There was the chance that the Americans would retaliate some other way, a chance which worried Khoury a great deal. However, what could Clinton or Pers or Netanyahu, for that matter, possibly do? The base was Fideliest. Even if they wanted to target it, they wouldn't know where it was and wouldn't find it even if they were standing in front of it. Dropping a nuke or some other weapon of mass destruction on a location which could conceivably have been hiding the base would be a non-starter. First, the odds were that they would not attack the right place. Second, even if they did realize that the base was in North Korea and that no magical spell could survive a nuke, would they be stupid enough to drop a nuke on a country which had a wizard as its supreme ruler? At the very minimum, the North would invade the South, and Voldemort would start portkeying all sorts of fun stuff into the US. NATO would probably activate, as would Russia and China. Once Russia and the US got involved, things would almost certainly go nuclear. At that point, it would be all she wrote. The blunt truth was that the only way America would be able to destroy the base would be with a nuke, and any such attack would immediately trigger World War III. Khoury knew it, Voldemort knew it, and he was fairly certain that both Travis Radner and Mikkel Ove knew it. As long as Khoury kept strict control over the people he gave the secret to, and did not die in the process, as that would make them secret keepers, which could make secrecy tricky, the base was absolutely impregnable. A few hours ago, he had addressed the heads of Hamas and Al-Qaeda and revealed his plan. There had been a long and heated argument about it. Most of his opponents argued that, although they were all in favor of putting the West in its place, this was going too far. It was way too dangerous, especially if America called their bluff. Eventually, it all came down to a simple vote. The vote was 25-23 in favor, and the speech was on. Khoury looked into the television camera and began to speak. Good evening. My name is Wizard Arif Khoury, and I am honored to be the new head of Al-Qaeda. I was recruited a few months ago by the great Damad Haran Dilmi, a man who martyred himself fighting against the great Satan, the United States of America. Word has reached us that President Clinton has determined that we were involved in the attack on the 4 towns in Massachusetts. I would like to admit that this is indeed the case. Mahatma Damil was one of us, and Dilmi ordered him to insinuate himself into America for humans and provide them with the depth charge and aircraft used in the attack. If everything went as planned and the Americans responded in with force, we would defer claiming responsibility and watch as America slaughtered its own people. America for humans had been working for us, though they never realized it at the time. Unfortunately, it was the will of Allah that Secretary Radner would find the bodies of the attackers and tie Damil to us. Realizing that there is no longer any reason to hide the truth, Al-Qaeda is taking the opportunity to come clean and claim responsibility. Leaders of the West, I have something very serious to discuss with you. There are plans in the pipeline for another attack, one which will dwarf every other operation we have performed in the past, including the attack on the 4 towns. We are estimating that the death toll of the proposed attack will be between 125,000 and 150,000 people. Khoury looked directly into the camera. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, we at Al-Qaeda have managed to acquire a weapon of mass destruction. The plan is to deploy this weapon against a target in the Western world or Israel within 1 month. It will be delivered by magic, so there is no way you will be able to intercept it. In addition, you will be unable to stop us, as I have cast the Fidelius charm on our base. For those of you unfamiliar with the Fidelius charm, it is a spell which makes a target literally undetectable to anyone who has not been told where it is. You could walk right by it and not even realize it was there. As long as that spell is in place, you will be incapable of targeting us. Even an invasion of our homeland will not work. We will carry out this attack unless several demands are met. First, the West agrees to all of the demands Dilmy specified in his earlier announcement preceding the attack on the 4 towns. Second, Israel gives up all of the territory it occupied during the 1967 war and returns it to its rightful owners. Third, Israel destroys any nuclear weapons that it currently possesses and does so under the supervision of the United Nations and 2 Arab countries. Fourth, Israel immediately halts all attacks on Hamas. Lastly, the United States changes its constitution to make Islam the official national religion. Khoury shook his head. I urge you to reconsider your actions. No, I beg you. We do not want to have to do this, as all life is sacred to us, yet we believe that we have no choice. You of the West have not responded to any other form of persuasion. Even the deaths of 7,000 wizards were not enough for you to change your minds. Leaders of the West, the fate of 100,000 people, and possibly the world, is in your hands. I pray that Allah grants you the wisdom to make the right decision. President Clinton's face was ashen as he turned off the television set. Slowly, he turned to Travis Radner. Mr. Radner, are they telling the truth? Could they have actually gotten their hands on a nuke? Radner thought for a moment. Possibly. However, what I suspect has happened is that they managed to get their hands on a small sample of depleted uranium or plutonium and are going to be using that. They can make a bomb out of a small sample like that. I thought that was physically impossible. You need a critical mass to get the nuclear reaction going. Radner drew a deep breath. Not if you use magic. You're not going to like this, but we believe that it will be possible for them to create a small fission weapon, maybe 25 to 50 kT, with just a small piece of fissionable material if they resort to magic. Clinton shook his head. Travis, I sure hope you're joking. Please tell me you're joking. I'm afraid not, Mr. President. The terrorist can cast the Engorgio spell to increase the amount of fissionable material, provided that they have a seed sample to start with. To detonate the bomb, they cast one final Engorgio to increase the fuel pellet to critical mass. They then compress it to detonation density with a Compressio Maximus spell. That's all they need to do. Get a tiny bit of bomb fuel and cast 2 spells. Not only that, but they can create multiple bombs with Geminio, a spell which duplicates an object. Clinton put his head in his hands. I hope they're bluffing. I don't know, Mr. President. We'd need more intelligence to ascertain the truth, but what Khoury is claiming is at least plausible. Whether he actually has the guts to do it is another thing. I suspect that he had to fight long and hard to get them to buy this operation. We're going to need to somehow break into Al-Qaeda and convince people to stop it. We'd need to interrogate people, figure out who the secret keeper is, which is probably Khoury himself, and force that person to tell us where the base is. Then we take out the base. Clinton grimaced. That's a good idea, Mr. Radner. The catch is whether they'll just use the break-in as an excuse to detonate the bomb. How do you think they'll deliver it? They said they'd use magic. That probably means apparition or Portkey. Most likely, the latter, as apparition across national boundaries is prohibited. We have reason to believe that the missile attack on Tel Aviv was delivered by Portkey. Could they smuggle it in through Mexico or Canada? Possibly. However, that would require that they get the weapon to Mexico, which is too risky. It's also assuming that the target is in the United States. For all we know, they could go after Tel Aviv or Paris. Clinton stood up. You're the Minister of Magic. Can you quarantine the country somehow and make sure that no one is able to Portkey or apparate in? Radner nodded. I can, Mr. President. I'll have to twist a few arms to get them to do that, though. We'll have to watch the ports, however, as well as the borders. We don't want it coming in that way, either. Good, Mr. Radner. This leaves the possibility of an Eichbom or some other weapon. Would it be possible for them to deliver it via a Fideliest Eichbom? Radner shook his head. I don't think so. Although the missile itself will be undetectable, its exhaust will be visible as soon as it leaves the missile. NORAD will pick it up and report it to you. We'd be able to track it with magic at that point and Portkey an obstacle into its path. It would hit the obstacle and be destroyed, preferably when it's outside the atmosphere. Furthermore, any launch would almost certainly trigger World War Roman III, which would obliterate Al-Qaeda along with everyone else. They wouldn't do it. Could a wizard prevent himself from being harmed by a nuclear explosion? No, Mr. President. Wizards are not powerful enough to do that. Clinton looked out the window. Numbers, Mr. Radner. What do you think the odds are that they will go through with this attack? Radner thought for a moment. I'd give them maybe a 60% chance of having actually acquired a weapon and a 30% chance of them actually having the cojones to use it if they have one. That's 1 in 5, sir. An 18% possibility that over 100,000 people will die. The expected value alone is equivalent to 3 quabbins. Clinton stood and began issuing orders. That's a relief. I thought it would be higher. Continue with the preparation to send troops into Afghanistan and quarantine the country so nothing gets in via Portkey or apparition. We're going to need to take out Al-Qaeda in a hurry now. In the meantime, we're going to classify this video as top secret. Let's hope we don't spook them, or that they're bluffing. Radner saluted. Yes, Mr. President. Chapter 189. Upset Stomach. Saturday, May 25, 1996, 7 days to full moonum/s Nordumnir St. Tomasu. S. Virgin Islands Horcruxes left. 3 ring, snake, cup. Harrison Cooper groaned and put his hand on his stomach. Oh boy, Courtney. I think something I ate disagreed with me. I've got myself a headache and a bit of an upset stomach. Let's hope I don't throw up. His wife looked at him, worried. Oh, do you need an antacid or something like that? I'm not sure we brought any, but I'm fairly certain that we'll be able to get one when we disembark in St. Thomas. I expect that they'll allow us to cash travelers' checks there if they don't take pound notes. I hope so, Courtney. It's not bad enough for me to stay on board, though. I don't want to miss any of these islands. After all, it's unlikely we'll get a chance to do this again. I wonder what triggered it. Courtney looked at him pointedly. I suspect it's all that rare meat you've been eating over the past few weeks. My guess is someone didn't cook it well enough to kill all the germs. I figure what's just going to happen is you'll just regurgitate the bad meat and everything will go back to normal. What on earth prompted this change of diet? Harrison shrugged. My body is probably telling me to eat more protein to help me deal with the aftereffects of that dog bite. That was a big dog, Courtney. You wouldn't want to meet one of those in a dark alley. However, what's done is done. Let's head on downstairs so we can go through customs to get onto the island. They headed over to the elevator and pressed the button. The door opened and revealed 2 people, a tourist dressed in shorts and a heavily armored man with a gun in a belt holster. The soldier was wearing American military fatigues. Harrison blinked at the soldier as he entered the elevator and the door closed behind Courtney. What the bloody hell? They have soldiers investigating the ship at customs checkpoints. What do they expect us to bring in, sand from Half Moon Key? The soldier shook his head. There's been a change of border security protocols. Sir, rest assured, we will try to be as invisible as possible. Have you seen anything unusual of late? Have people been acting strangely at all? Harrison looked at his wife and shook his head. I can't say that I have, soldier. All I know is that something I ate disagreed with me, and I need some antacids. Do you by any chance have any on you? The soldier shook his head. I'm afraid not, sir. However, I'm sure you'll be able to find some downtown in Charlotte Amalie. The elevator stopped and the door opened. Turning to Harrison once again, the soldier said, "Thank you for your cooperation and welcome to the Virgin Islands." With that, he left the elevator and headed down the hall. It took them a good hour and a half to get through customs. He'd been told American customs could be time-consuming, but he hadn't thought it would be this bad. Eventually, though, he and his wife were through and walked down the gangway onto the island. They bought some antacids and Pepto-Bismol in a convenience store which took travelers' checks. Minutes later, the nausea began to dissipate. That was a good sign. Harrison, though. Grinning, he started looking for the tour groups that were going to the national park on St. John. Derek Michelson's phone rang. It was probably his daughter, which meant that she was likely going to need a ride back from her friends. On the other hand, it could be another customer who wanted their software fixed, he thought. He deemed that unlikely as it was Saturday night, and he had told the people working overtime to only call him in case of an emergency. He lifted the handset. "Hello, let me guess, Jenna, you want a ride back?" An unfamiliar voice responded on the other end. "I'm sorry to bother you, Mr. Michelson, but my name is not Jenna. I am Rufus Scrimgeour, the Minister of Magic. How are you doing tonight?" Derek stared at the phone in puzzlement. What the bloody hell was the Minister of Magic calling him for? He wasn't a wizard, as far as he knew. "This is a bit of a surprise, Minister Scrimgeour. I must tell you, sir, that if you're looking for a wizard, I'm not a wizard. I think you have the wrong number." "Perhaps. Are you the Derek Sanderson of Biocode Corporation, who has a man named Mr. Harrison Cooper as one of the people he manages?" Derek blinked. The Minister of Magic had called to ask him about Harrison Cooper. This had to be a practical joke of some sort. Well, he'd play along for now. Cautiously, he said, "Yes, Harrison Cooper works for me." "Thank you, Mr. Michelson. We was wondering if you could tell me where he is. As you may or may not know, he was one of the people bitten by the rabid dog at Wembley Stadium earlier this month. We have reason to believe that this creature may have caused him magical injury and that his life may be in danger. We need to find him as soon as possible. Otherwise, he may become a danger to himself and possibly to others." Derek frowned. Harrison had mentioned that he'd been attacked before he left on the trip, but hadn't thought much about it. Harrison hadn't seemed particularly injured, but then again, what did he know about magical injuries? He turned back to the phone. "I'm not entirely sure where he is right now, Minister. All I know is that he's away on his honeymoon with his new wife. I think he mentioned something about a Caribbean cruise." The minister's tone of voice changed abruptly to one of great concern. "Harrison Cooper is no longer in the country." "That is correct, Minister. He isn't." Was he aware of the public service announcement that requested that people who were attacked should contact the Ministry of Magic? Perhaps. When was the announcement made? "It was made on the 16th, Mr. Michelson." Derek grunted. In that case, Harrison probably doesn't know about it. He was probably on a transatlantic flight at the time he left on the 16th. Scrimgeour's voice softened. "You've been quite helpful, Mr. Michelson. Hopefully, we will be able to save your employee's life in time." Derek had to know. What did that dog do to him? "It's a magical injury, Mr. Michelson. That's all we know right now. Do you know which ship he's on?" "Number, Minister." "When will he be back in the United Kingdom?" Derek thought for a moment. "I'd say somewhere around the 15th or so of June. Why do you ask? Can you treat him then?" "I'm afraid not, Mr. Michelson. By then, it may be too late. Let's hope for the best, sir. Now, if you would excuse me, I have to let you go now to make some arrangements to help Mr. Cooper. Good evening, Mr. Michelson, and thank you for your time." Lord Voldemort looked at the letter with surprise and pride. "Well, Lucius, I think I underestimated your son. I told him to kill Snape, and your son argued that it would be more in our interests to have Draco serve as a double agent into Dumbledore's headquarters. His reasoning makes sense, Lucius, and I would argue that such a role is difficult and dangerous enough to serve as his initiation rite. As of now, he is to be considered to have full Death Eater status. Lucius breathed a sigh of relief. That's good to hear, my lord. Draco is more likely to survive that way, and it provides us with information about the Order of the Phoenix. And Draco's argument is valid in that anything Snape does can be neutralized by Draco's information, effectively taking Snape out of the picture. Correct, Lucius. How are Al-Qaeda and Hamas coming along? They're settling into their new homes even as we speak, my lord. Hamas is itching to punish Israel for its attacks and the death of Rodolphus Lestrange, and Al-Qaeda has bluffed that it would drop a nuclear weapon on the West if its demands aren't met. Voldemort frowned. That's a dangerous game, Lucius. They're threatening with nuclear weapons which they don't have. Correct, my lord. Voldemort thought for a moment. Well, North Korea does have some small nuclear reactors under construction. I'll see what I can do to help them out. Lucius nodded. Very good, my lord. Chapter 190. Preparation for Invasion. Sunday, May 26, 1996, 6 days to full moonival office White House, Washington, DQ United States of America Horcruxes left. 3. Ring, snake, cup. Bill Clinton looked at the world leaders seating around the Oval Office. Gentlemen, I'll be frank. We have no idea if Al-Qaeda actually has a nuke, but we have to assume that they do. They gave us 1 month to comply with their demands, which probably means that they're having trouble figuring out how to deliver it. What this means, of course, is that we've got 1 month to wipe them off the map. None of us can allow terrorists access to nuclear weapons. That's why we all need to form a coalition to go into Afghanistan and do one of two things: take out their wizards or take out their nuke, if it exists. Once we do that, we can mop up the rest of them with our own wizards and troops. Thoughts? The French Prime Minister shook his head. The 1 month delay be a bluff, Mr. President. If they are going to use magic to deliver it, they may have everything in place already and could detonate it early if they are attacked. This is going to be very dangerous. Clinton shook his head. Radner suspects that the odds of them using the nuke are going to be around 1 in 5. I tend to concur. Having a nuke is one thing, but having the balls to actually detonate it is another. Killing 100,000 people is a hell of a lot different than killing a few hundred. They may say they're going to use it, but when they realize the consequences for Afghanistan and the world in general, they could very easily chicken out. John Major frowned. We can't assume that, though. We have to assume that they've got the nuke and are willing to use it. Can we put more pressure on the Afghan government to turn in the terrorists? The German leader shook his head. The Afghan government has got its hands full with the Taliban siege at the moment. They aren't really in any position to do anything useful. I suspect, however, that if we were to invade Afghanistan to get at Al-Qaeda, the two sides would bury the hatchet in a hurry in the face of a foreign threat. And believe me, Prime Minister Major, you don't want the Taliban as your enemy. Clinton grunted. So we can't rely on help from Kabul to round them up, and if we go in there to do it ourselves, we'll have everyone uniting to kill us. The German looked resigned. I'm afraid so, Mr. President. If we go in to get them, we're going to have to commit a lot of troops. We're going to need a full-scale invasion with many, many countries involved. That will spread the risk of nuclear terrorism throughout the army. The Russian leader groaned. Chancellor, no one is going to want to commit troops if there's a chance they're going to get nuked. Besides, you saw what happened to us, well, the Soviet Union, when we tried to invade Afghanistan. We thought we would be able to crush them easily, but they managed to elude us over and over again. Any attempt to invade is likely to become another Vietnam. Besides, for all we know, they have multiple nukes. Mr. Radner, you mentioned earlier that they can use the Geminio spell to duplicate an object. Radner nodded. Yes, Prime Minister. This spell exists, and it could be used to duplicate a uranium or plutonium bomb core. The Russian bored in. Is there any limit as to how many copies can be created? Radner shook his head. No, Prime Minister. Once they have one nuke, they can create as many as they wish until we take out their wizards. And with their base under the Fidelius charm, finding those wizards is going to be well nigh impossible unless we track down their secret keeper. The problem is that if I were running Al-Qaeda, I'd make sure that the secret keeper never leaves the base. That way, there's no way the location can leak out. There was virtually a good 30 seconds of swearing in various languages, and Clinton had to raise his voice to be heard over the din. Gentlemen, odds are that they will be reluctant to use the nukes. Don't get carried away. I'd have probably given in to a few of their demands, or at least asked for time, if I thought that the invasion wasn't worth it. You wouldn't be here in that case. We've believed that it's still worth going along with the invasion, and I want you guys to help me. The Japanese emissary turned to Radner. Secretary Radner, how big a weapon do you think these people have? We're estimating about 25 KT, which is roughly the level of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki attacks. It's a fission weapon, not a fusion weapon. But can they make a multi-stage device if they get tritium? If they've got the fission weapon? Radner's eyes widened for a moment in surprise. He gritted his teeth and thought for a moment. I'm afraid it's technologically plausible, sir. However, I suspect that it's highly unlikely that they have a fusion bomb. Fusion bombs are much more difficult to create, and the casualty total they mentioned is much more consistent with a Hiroshima-style weapon than with a multi-stage weapon which would kill millions. Clinton looked sternly around the room. I want you to stop exporting tritium now. We don't want them to get a chance to improve their bomb any further. Everyone nodded. Relieved that an H-bomb terrorist attack was unworkable, Clinton brought the discussion back to the coalition to take out Al-Qaeda. Within an hour, everyone had agreed to join and had signed a document indicating that they would classify the Al-Qaeda broadcast and attempt to recruit other countries. Mission accomplished, he thought. As the leaders were getting ready to leave, the German turned to the president. Mr. President, I've heard rumors that America for Humans is trying to reorganize itself. Is that true? If so, what are you doing to stop them? Clinton chuckled. You'll find out soon enough, Chancellor. You'll find out soon enough. Jackson, Mississippi. The senator stood in front of a large group of America for Humans followers. Many were also members of the KKK, complete with their hooded robes. The senator had never liked the KKK all that much, but at a time like this, they could come in handy. He raised his hands to the sky as he spoke. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. A wizard has come onto the scene who is a clear and present danger not only to the United States, but to the world in general. He has managed to take over Al-Qaeda, the terrorist group responsible for the attack in Massachusetts, and transform it into a tool of the Antichrist, Lord Voldemort. God wills us into action, men and women of America for Humans. Had he not approved of our movement, he would have had us all rounded up immediately after the attack on the Quabbin. That has clearly not happened, which means that he still has another use for us. Until today, none of us realized what that use was. Consider your name, America for Humans. We fight to preserve America, and we fight to get rid of wizards. The Almighty inspired Patrick Dursley Burgess to choose that name, ladies and gentlemen. Why is that? Because he intended us to join together in the fight against the wizard which is threatening America, the leader of Al-Qaeda. The recruiting office is just down the street, ladies and gentlemen. Your president is embarking on a crusade to destroy this evil wizard. He has announced that he is willing to offer amnesty to any America for Humans member who enlists in the armed forces and participates in any action taken against Al-Qaeda. Those of you who enlist will have all charges against you dropped in exchange for fighting your holy crusade. Those of you who do not will still have to worry about arrest and prosecution when you are exposed by the government. The senator gestured towards the recruiting office. Those of you who wish to enlist, follow me. Those of you who do not wish to enlist will have 1 hour to leave this area before the president's offer of amnesty expires. All right, who's with me? The entire crowd cheered and began waving Confederate and American flags. The senator's security detail had its hands full trying to keep people under control as he led them towards the recruiting office. Looking back, the senator saw people running to join the group. KKK hoods were bobbing up and down in excitement. Ms. Nordham, Courtney stared at her husband in worry. Harrison, now what did you eat? You look a bit green there. Harrison grimaced. It wasn't the meat. I haven't had any red meat for a couple of days now. All I had was some sushi and pizza. Courtney threw the antacids at him. Here, take some more of these. If it persists tomorrow morning, we'll go down into the medical section on a deck and below and see if we can find a doctor. Gringotts Bank. Griffook, the goblin, looked at the document in front of him. Yes, I believe you are correct. With Bellatrix Lestrange dead, it looks like we're going to have to rely on Rodolphus's will to determine who gets custody of her vault. Who is the beneficiary, according to his will? The other goblin pointed at the parchment. The Lestranges are survived by no children, parents, or siblings other than Andromeda Tonks, who has been banished. The closest next of kin after that is Draco Malfoy, Bellatrix's nephew. Griffook frowned. So what's the problem? He's a minor. He's only 15 or 16. Griffook shrugged. Give the key to Lucius until Draco attains his majority. The other goblin rolled his eyes. Lucius is missing, Griffook. Griffook threw his hands up in the air. Fine. Give it to Draco and have Draco give it to Lucius once Lucius is found. Now let me get back to my wife and kids. It's a Sunday. Chapter 191. Poisoned Chalice. Monday, May 27, 1996. 5 days to full Moon-Knesset Jerusalem Horcruxes left. 3. Ring, snake, cup. Cameras flashed as the Speaker of the House announced the results of the voting. The vote of no confidence had succeeded in ousting Shimon Peres from the Prime Minister's office. Judging from the congratulations Netanyahu was receiving, it was obvious who Peres' replacement was going to be. Netanyahu was thrilled with the opportunity to become Prime Minister. Now he'd be able to punish Hamas for all of these attacks. The people agreed with him and was crying for blood. Peres had done what he could to strike back, but he hadn't been thorough enough. Netanyahu planned a full-scale invasion of the West Bank. Hamas had been a thorn in Israel's side for several years now. It was about time that someone did something about it once and for all. There would be no more tit-for-tat raids, which would continue year after year. Netanyahu wasn't afraid to use everything in his arsenal short of nukes. He'd throw the entire Ministry of Magic against Hamas, if necessary, to achieve total victory. Israel would never be afraid again. This was, of course, assuming that he was actually chosen to become the new Prime Minister. Granted, there was always a possibility that some of the Orthodox hardliners had a trick up their sleeve and decided to send the coalition in another direction. On the other hand, the probability of that happening was about the same as the Earth crashing into the Sun in the next couple of months. A few hours later, it was done, and Peres shook his hand for the benefit of the camera. The former Prime Minister's face reflected a combination of sadness and relief. Netanyahu had a bad feeling about this. He could understand why Peres felt sad, but relieved. Was there something about the Hamas attacks, which Peres had considered so top secret, that no one other than the Prime Minister was supposed to know about it? Something that scared Peres so much that he was actually somewhat willing to relinquish power and hand the problem to someone else. Netanyahu considered that for a moment. Peres had just come back from an unannounced meeting with the President of the United States. Before he had left, he had seemed puzzled. He had come back, however, absolutely horrified. Several of their MKs had asked him what the problem was, and he said that he couldn't comment about it at this time. Netanyahu hadn't even known that there was a security level high enough that even the MKs couldn't discuss it openly. Well, he was about to find out. Peres had invited whoever the next Prime Minister would be. He had probably figured that his tenure was over to a confidential security, briefing deep in the bowels of the Ministry of Magic. A few hours later, Mickle Oved had apparated Pers, him, and the Secretary of Defense over into a sealed room to conduct the meeting. Netanyahu started the conversation. "All right, Shimon. I can tell from the expression on your face that something Clinton said troubled you enough not to tell the Knesset about it. Now that I'm Prime Minister, I take it that I need to know." Pers nodded. "That is indeed the case, Bibi. I can summarize the problem in a sentence 4 words long." "Really? What's that?" Pers stared at him hard. "Al-Qaeda may have nukes." Netanyahu nearly fell over in shock. "You've got to be kidding." Pers shook his head violently. "I wish I were." Arif Khoury, Dilmi's replacement as the head of Al-Qaeda, made an announcement a couple of days ago that they have acquired a weapon of mass destruction capable of killing over 100,000 people. They said that they would deploy this weapon against a target in the United States or Israel, unless the United States and Israel agreed to several ridiculous demands within 1 month. Netanyahu blinked. "Al-Qaeda's bothering us now, as if Hamas weren't enough with those damned Portkey missiles of theirs." "That's right. Khoury is demanding that we relinquish all of the territories we acquired in the 1967 and immediately cease all attacks on Hamas. We are also required to destroy of all of our nuclear weapons under the supervision of the United Nations and 2 other countries." "What? Without nukes, we'd be finished." Part of the reason the state of Israel has lasted as long as it has is because of the threat of nuclear retaliation. Without nukes, the Arabs would overrun us in a matter of decades, if not years. Pers groaned. "I am only passing along their ultimatum. You see now why we had to keep this confidential. If any of this leaks out, the entire country will panic. People will flee Tel Aviv and Jerusalem in droves, which will in turn provide just the confusion to encourage Hamas to continue their attacks." Netanyahu put his head in his hands. "That's awful. However, first things first. Do they actually have a nuke, and if so, are they actually willing to use it?" Mickle Oved answered this. "Judging from what Secretary Radner has told me, the US government believes that there is a 60% chance that they have a nuke and a 30% chance that they have the guts to use it. That's an 18% chance of an attack, almost 1 in 5. Where is this nuke, if it exists? No one knows. The base is supposedly under the Fidelius charm, a powerful enchantment which makes it absolutely undetectable to either wizards or muggles unless someone infiltrates the facility. So why don't we do that?" The Secretary of Defense responded. "Al-Qaeda has just announced a hiring freeze. It is no longer accepting any new recruits. This makes good tactical sense, Prime Minister. They'll know that anyone they don't recognize is a potential and will kill them on the spot. What if we give the spies invisibility cloaks?" The Minister of Magic cut in. "It won't work. The Al-Qaeda operative would have to be specifically speak to our agent in order to reveal the location of the base. The agent must therefore be visible. Can we disrupt their Fidelius charm?" "No, there is no known way to do this other than inserting a spy." Netanyahu winced. "That's bad." Pers grinned bleakly. "Now you can see why I'm not altogether upset that you've taken over. It's your problem now." Netanyahu's tone was sarcastic. "Thank you, Shimon. What does Clinton suggest?" Pers began pacing around the room. "We decided that most of the Western nations are going to form a coalition to invade Afghanistan and do anything possible to find that base. Once we do that, we find the nuke and destroy it along with any wizards." Netanyahu frowned. "Wizards? They're going to be delivering the nuke by magical means. Also, Radner believes that wizards may be able to take one nuke and make as many copies as they wish using a simple spell." Netanyahu's jaw dropped. "Are you telling me that they may have access to a potentially unlimited number of nukes?" "Correct." "How big are these nukes? Minister Oved, how bad can this get?" The minister answered. The current estimate is about 25 KT each. That's about the size of the weapons used against Japan. That may not be much by modern standards. However, if you have a lot of them. As if that weren't enough, Pers broke in. Exactly. Oh, and I promised Clinton that we'd stop exporting tritium because Radner isn't convinced that they can't make an H-bomb given enough time, such as possibly a month. And once they have one H-bomb, they can duplicate that and protect those with the Fidelius charm. And God help us all if Hamas finds out about this and asks for some. Netanyahu reeled and turned back to Pers. You're right, Shimon. Forget Hamas. This threat is much more urgent. I hate to think what people are going to say when I start diverting troops and so forth from the Hamas missions over to this one, which would obviously have to be secret, as Israel has no overt reason to invade Afghanistan at the moment, only the US does. I promise everyone that will blow Hamas to kingdom, come only to find I have to send everyone after Al-Qaeda without telling anybody. Pers chuckled. Think of it this way, if you get ousted, you can always give the problem back to me. Gaunt House England, Albus Dumbledore looked at the small ring in front of him. He was tempted to put it on. Very tempted. However, he knew that Voldemort had packed some awful surprises into his Horcruxes in the past. He still remembered that awful eye and that ghost of Hermione Granger trying to convince him to spare the locket. He looked at the familiar symbol on the face of the ring, the circle, line, and triangle of the Deathly Hallows. He couldn't destroy it. He just couldn't. This was a famous historical relic. It belonged in a museum. Granted, not many people knew about the Deathly Hallows. However, the few who did know about them would understand its importance. Voldemort was getting way too powerful and was starting to take over the Muggles. He had to be stopped before it was too late. Grimly, he cast the duplication charm on the ring and placed the duplicate where the original had been, just as Regulus Black had done with the locket. That was becoming standard procedure at this point during the Horcrux hunt. Then came the hard part. Placing the blade of the sword just underneath the bottom of the resurrection stone, where it was mounted on the ring, he spent a few minutes sawing it off the top off the ring. The ring howled for a moment, as in agony, and eventually quieted down. Dumbledore cast the soul identification spell to confirm that the Horcrux had been destroyed, and was relieved when it indicated that there were no Slytherin souls left in the building. Satisfied with his work, Dumbledore vanished the bottom half of the ring and examined the resurrection stone. He doubted Voldemort had realized that the gem mounted on this ring was a powerful magical relic. Otherwise, the Dark Lord would have made the resurrection stone itself into the Horcrux, and not the ring which had held it. Only two Horcruxes were left, Hufflepuff's cup and Nagini. He knew where the cup was, in Gringotts, but where on earth was the snake? He'd deal with them in a few minutes. However, there was one thing he had to check just to be certain. He'd been waiting for a chance to do this for many, many years. He turned the ring over 3 times. Seconds later, a ghostly image of a little girl materialized beside him. Dumbledore nearly broke down in tears, yet he somehow managed to blurt out a short sentence. Hello, Ariana. Hospital Wingham/S. Nordham. The doctor finished his investigation of Harrison Cooper. Well, Mr. Cooper, I honestly don't see anything wrong with you. I can tell you've gotten a bit of a headache and have been feeling nauseous of late, but I don't see any obvious cause. Do you have any food allergies? Harrison shook his head. Not that I know of. Are you allergic to any animals? Harrison chuckled. Well, I get sick around cats, but that usually takes the form of asthma. Have you been asthmatic at all on this trip? No, doctor. The doctor thought for a moment. It's possible you could have picked up a food allergy from something you've been eating of late. Here's what I recommend. I'll prescribe you some stronger nausea medicine and something for your headache. In the meantime, stay away from the red meat. The cholesterol will be bad for you anyway, and keep a diary of what you eat. Try a variety of food. The restaurant on the Lido deck has a lot of different options for lunch and dinner. If you see any link between a certain type of food and your sickness, inform me immediately." Harrison stood up and shook the doctor's hand. "I'll do that. Thank you for your time." "It's my pleasure, Harrison. Enjoy the rest of the cruise." Chapter 192, Wolfsbane Pill. Tuesday, May 28, 1996. 4 days to full moon defense against the Dark Arts Professor's Office Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry Great Britain Horcruxes left. 2. Snake, Cup, Severus Snape had done a lot of strange things in his potioneering career before. Incorporating small dosages of Wolfsbane potion into small capsules, which were supposed to be swallowed by a Muggle, however, almost certainly topped them all. He had tried to convince everyone that the Wolfsbane potion did not stay potent for very long. They wouldn't listen, however, so he had been forced to improvise by trying to throw bizarre in Muggle concoctions which were supposed to make the pills last long enough to stay potent for months. Snape had no idea what the combination of Wolfsbane and Muggle compounds would do. He had ransacked the Hogwarts library, including the restricted section, and there was no information whatsoever as to what would happen if Muggle medicine was introduced to a magical potion. If he had been forced to make a prediction, he would have argued that the Wolfsbane potion would last 2 weeks instead of 1. That wouldn't do much good if the pills had to be taken over the course of a month, but it was definitely progress. Snape had been surprised when Scrimgeour had offered the new Muggle lycanthropes a week's worth in one sitting. Even he hadn't realized that it was possible to prepare the potion more than 1 day in advance. Perhaps a combination of the Muggle preservatives and whatever concoction Scrimgeour had cooked up would do the job. The only thing that he knew was that the stale Wolfsbane potion pills had managed to reduce the headaches that the 26 Muggle lycanthropes had been experiencing by a good 50–75%. It wasn't as good as a freshly made Wolfsbane potion, but a couple of the patients who had taken the stale pills had suffered no symptoms at all. That was a good sign. Placing a fresh dosage of Wolfsbane potion in a pill by itself had exactly the same effect as an equivalent amount of Wolfsbane quaffed in potion form. Adding some preservative to a fresh dosage of Wolfsbane to a minimal effect on the efficacy of the potion. One person claimed to have had a headache, but Snape and the rest of the Muggle physicians involved with the lycanthropes could not tell whether this was due to the fact that he had become a werewolf or because of a food allergy. The biggest test would involve combining Scrimgeour's week-long preservation technique with the Muggle preservatives. As Snape had just found out about Scrimgeour's technique, such an experiment had not yet been conducted. Pocketing 7 or 8 of the odd-looking pills, he headed through the corridors to Dumbledore's office. His former headmaster was expecting an update on his progress with the Wolfsbane pill. He was on the verge of collapse, which only made his normally sour disposition worse. Combining his Order of the Phoenix work, Owl's supervision and preparation, and attempt at playing Muggle doctor was taking all of his time. In one sense, he felt relieved that Voldemort had found out about his double agent work. He couldn't imagine where he would have found the time to follow Voldemort's orders as well. He knocked on Dumbledore's door, and the venerable professor let him in. "Good morning, Severus. How are things going?" Snape tossed a few of the capsules on the table. "I believe we've made progress, sir. The Muggles will have to take 10 of these to receive a complete dosage, but the combination of Minister Scrimgeour's work and mine might actually have a chance of working. Scrimgeour gets it up to a week, and the Muggle preservative doubles the time an untreated potion will last with about a 25–50% drop in efficacy. Assuming the two effects do not interfere with each other, consuming 20 pills 2 weeks in advance will get the job done. We still need much more testing, though. Assuming both, I'm afraid we're going to need a lot more work to get them lasting a month or more. We'll need to wait at least 1 more month to try it on the group as a whole." Dumbledore smiled. "That's excellent work, Severus. I must say, however, that I doubt Muggles are going to want to take 20 pills that size in one sitting." Snape glared at him. The alternative is worse, Professor. Headaches, 4 feet, and attacking your spouse are going to get you killed. Is there any way one of these pills can prevent the transformation completely? No, Professor. The wolfsbane potion only keeps the lycanthrope's mind intact during the transformation. This allows the lycanthrope to refrain from attacking other people. It does not prevent the transformation itself. The only way to prevent a victim from transforming is by locking him in a windowless room the night of the full moon and ensure that no moonlight falls upon him. That's good to hear, Severus. How has the search for the missing werewolf been going? I've been out of touch ever since I started chasing that Horcrux. Snape shook his head. The news is not good, Professor. We have finally tracked down Harrison Cooper. Unfortunately, he is somewhere where Rufus Scrimgeour cannot retrieve him. Indeed, none of us can. Dumbledore frowned. What do you mean? Is he dead? If he's dead, we don't need to worry about him. No, Professor. He's alive, though he's almost certainly starting to exhibit symptoms by now. The problem we have is that he is not in the United Kingdom. Our Ministry of Magic has no jurisdiction over him at this point. Dumbledore stared at him. You mean this is going to have to become an international manhunt? I'm afraid so. Even worse, he will be constantly shifting countries from time to time over the next few days, straight through to his transformation on Saturday night. Dumbledore's eyes widened. What? How can that be? Snape stared at the floor. Professor, Harrison Cooper is currently in the middle of a 1-month cruise through the Caribbean on the Dutch-flagged ship MS Nordam. According to his supervisor at his Muggle job, he and his wife left 16 May for their honeymoon and plan to return about a month later. During this cruise, he will be visiting various islands ruled by various nations on different days. He will be spending the night of the full moon traveling between the Dutch Antilles Islands of Aruba and Curacao. Dumbledore put his hand to his head. 16 May. Wasn't that the day of the Prime Minister's broadcast? Yes, Professor. From what I've heard, Cooper was in an aircraft flying across the Atlantic when the Prime Minister made the announcement. He has likely not received any updates from the United Kingdom since 15 May. So he still has no idea that he's a werewolf and could be a danger to himself and to others. Correct, Professor. He's probably passing his lycanthropy symptoms off to allergies or the flu or something like that. He may be going to Muggle doctors for treatment, but of course they're going to prescribe the wrong remedies. Dumbledore kicked at the table. We need to get our hands on this man and do so quickly. Can we intercept the boat? In principle, yes, as the boat's route is well known. In practice, though, the international nature of the cruise makes it difficult for one nation to attempt this operation. I would suggest, however, that the Dutch wizards take charge of the rescue attempt. Dumbledore frowned. That means we're going to have to go through Dialynis and the International Confederation of Wizards. All that bureaucracy is going to take time, and we don't have time. Snape stared daggers at him. Well, tell him to make time. That boat likely has people from all over the world on it. If he infects them and they are able to leave the ship, we're done for. The pandemic is going to go international, at which point nothing is going to be able to stop it. This is our last chance, Professor, and we need to take it. Dumbledore reached into his pocket and pulled out the resurrection stone. I'll ask Minerva and Rufus to start that process. In the meantime, I am pleased to report that I have successfully dispatched the ring Horcrux. In doing so, we may have caught ourselves a break. You see, Voldemort made the ring into the Horcrux and left the stone alone. That is fortunate, because the stone is a powerful magical artifact. Snape stared at the resurrection stone. I can't say that it looks familiar. What is it? Have you ever heard of the tale of the 3 brothers, Severus? Snape snorted. From Beedle the Bard. I have, but what does that folk tale have to do with this? In response, Dumbledore gave him the stone. Simple. Humor me and turn this stone over 3 times in your hand. Skeptical, Snape did as Dumbledore commanded and was astonished to see a shadowy figure appear to his right. It looked very familiar. In fact, he dropped the ring in shock, and the figure disappeared. Staring at where the figure had been, he gasped. That was Lily Evans, but she's dead. Indeed she is, Severus. Severus, meet the resurrection stone. I suspect that it could come in handy when it comes to fighting Voldemort.